In this video, we're going to be putting together a 1-liter mini gaming PC that's capable of playing your favorite AAA games all day long. And with the size of this thing, coming in at only 1 liter, it's smaller than most consoles out there on the market, so I do think that this would be perfect for the living room. What I've got here is an unassuming Lenovo ThinkCenter. This is actually the M90q Gen 3, so with this, we do get a 12th Gen Intel CPU. And on the surface, yeah, it just looks like an ordinary office PC. And really, when it comes down to it, that's exactly what we have here. But these M90q ThinkCenters are hiding a really cool little secret. Now, we can pull the top right off here. Not much going on inside, and this is actually a refurbished unit. Well, it was a used unit that I picked up on eBay. A little bit of room over here. Usually have a 2.5-inch tray, which was missing with the one that I purchased. Over on the right-hand side, we've got our CPU and cooler. But right in the corner, there's actually a PCIe slot, albeit it is proprietary right now, but they do sell adapters, and we'll talk more about that in just a bit. But I'd say my favorite thing about the Gen 3 here with this slot is the fact that it's actually PCIe 8X Gen 4. With an older M90Q, they're coming in at PCIe X4, Gen 2, maybe even Gen 1, depending on the version you get. So what this means is we can get more performance out of a GPU installed in this thing as long as it supports 8X and Gen 4 configurations. But like I mentioned, and as you can see here, it's a proprietary slot, so we can't just install a GPU like it is. We will need an adapter, and luckily they do sell them. Now I had trouble finding the correct adapter, but I contacted one of my good buddies online. Within 5 minutes, he had a link for me. I'll leave a link for this in the description. There's a couple that are available, and the first one I bought was not compatible with the Gen 3s. And through my research, I know for a fact that some people have run into the same issues, so I will leave a link in the description for the correct riser card that I picked up. So we've got the 1-liter mini PC with the 12th Gen CPU. We've also got an adapter so we can plug a PCIe X16 card in here. But we're still working with a very small form factor, so cards will be a bit limited, but my go-to right now has been working out really well with these smaller builds, and it's actually the YESTON low-profile RTX 3050. So we've got 6 gigs of VRAM, and it is coming in around $21 more expensive than the dual-slot low-profile RTX 3050 that you'll see, but if you're looking to go small form factor with it, this is definitely a really good choice for 1080p gaming. There are low-profile single-slot cards on the market that will outperform the RTX 3050, and I'm talking about without any modification, but those cards are anywhere from $800 to $1,400, so we're not going to be spending that with this. It's coming in at like $210 for the GPU. Installing this GPU is actually really easy, but it's really going to come down to how your ThinkCenter is configured. I mean, there's many different ways they can set these up from the factory. This one had 2 display ports installed. These would work with the iGPU on that 12th Gen Intel CPU, so I'm just going to go ahead and remove them. And now we've actually got enough room for this low-profile single-slot card. Believe it or not, I mean, it fits in here perfectly. We can put the top right on it. So what we're going to do is just grab the riser card. We're going to install the GPU, and now we've got a little 90-degree riser card on this low-profile card. We're just going to go ahead and slot it right down into the ThinkCenter. We'll just line it up with that proprietary slot, and this little YESTON fits in here perfectly. You could always remove the bracket from the GPU if you wanted to, but it does fit in here with it, so I'm just going to leave it right there. And another great thing about the Gen 2 and the Gen 3 ThinkCenter M90Qs is the top actually has some ventilation. So we've got that grate there, which will allow fresh air to be pulled in over that GPU and CPU. The first generations didn't have this grate, and I've actually done a couple videos. I drilled a hole in one with an RX 6400. It works good like that, but having this already pre-installed, in my opinion, is the way to go. There's one last thing that you'll need to add to something like this. Most of the time, these Lenovos come with either like a 65-watt power supply or a 90. I'm going to be adding a 230-watt power supply, and these are pretty cheap. It's actually a Lenovo laptop power supply, but it works with these, and it'll give us the extra wattage we need for that GPU. So I've got everything set up, ready to go. We'll go ahead and power this thing up, and I'm going to be running Windows 11 with this machine. First thing I wanted to do was head into the BIOS, and there's not a lot of performance options here, given that we're working with an OEM mini PC. Storage setup, video setup. I've actually disabled the iGPU. PCIe Express setup. And since we've got the ThinkCenter Gen 3 version, it's got that 8x slot up to PCIe Gen 4. And I'm going to leave it at auto. It does default there for me. Under advanced, we've got speed step, everything like that. And under power, when I first saw this, I got excited, but unfortunately, really the only thing we have here is the intelligent cooling. Just kind of the fan profile. It was in performance mode out of the box, and that's where I'm going to leave it. Full speed, this thing gets super loud. So in performance mode, that's where it's going to have to be with this unit. And it's not going to up the TDP or anything like that or give us any more performance. It's basically just going to change that fan profile for us. So I've been up and running with this system for a while now. Everything's been working great. It hasn't shut off on me or anything like that. And as you can see, we've got that 12th Gen Intel Core i5-12500HT. Now that T is important because that indicates that this is a 35 watt CPU as opposed to a non-T version that would be the 65 watt. But in the system, it will go higher, and it actually has a maximum turbo up to 74. I've added some extra RAM here, gone up to 32 gigs because I had 2 sticks of 16 laying around. And of course, we've got that low profile RTX 3050 with 6 gigs of VRAM. I do want to give you an idea of what kind of power this CPU is pulling, and then we'll move over to the GPU. But from CPU-Z, we'll just stress this out right here using hardware info. We'll zoom in just a bit. It's right there, 45 to 47. And again, with that turbo boost, it will go on up. There are ways that we could up this using something like throttle stop, but you got to keep in mind, I mean, this is a super small form factor system with a small cooler. And at 45 to 47 watts, with that overboost a bit, this little CPU actually performs really well given the form factor. Next thing I wanted to talk about here was the GPU's TGP, or total graphics power. So we'll just go ahead and run firmark, and this jumps up to 70 watts. Now, there was nothing I needed to do to get this up to 70 watts on the GPU side and 47 on the CPU. On some older models, there are a few tweaks you need to do to get maximum power on both sides. And I think the Gen 3 could also handle a 65 watt CPU paired up with this GPU. And of course, we'd probably see much better performance out of the CPU going to a 65 watt chip, but then you're going to be working with a lot more noise here because that fan does need to spin up to keep it cooler at those higher wattages. But the main reason I put this unit together was for gaming, so now I want to show you how it performs. The first one we have here is Spider-Man Remastered, and going into this, I'm completely aware that we've got that RTX 3050. I was under the impression that I'd need to use a little bit of DLSS. But as you can see here, we don't need that. We don't need frame gen. We're at 1080 very high settings, and we're actually getting averages of around 86 FPS with this game. Next up, Cyberpunk 2077 1080 high, and we do need DLSS. It defaults using FSR, but go to DLSS balanced and you can get averages in the low 80s with this. Even with lots of effects and explosions on screen, this never dipped under 60 FPS. I mean, it was a pretty steady experience. The RTX 3050 does handle esports games really well. You want to do some Fortnite, some Dota. I've got Overwatch 2 running at 1080 high settings with no DLSS. And with this, I'm seeing an average of around 192 FPS. Looking a little higher most of the time, I mean when there's not a lot of stuff going on, but you can see it dip down just a bit. Either way, this little system handles it just fine. Favorite arcade racer, I knew we really weren't going to have an issue running this, and I know for a fact that that RTX 3050 can run this at 1440p high settings at around 80 FPS on average. You can see at 1080 Ultra with no DLSS, we're up over 120 FPS on average. Doom Eternal 1080p, high settings, afterburner up in the top left, and I've also got the in-game stats up in the top right. No scaling going on, so we're at 100% resolution scale 1080, average of 103 FPS. Black Myth Wukong is another one that I always like to test, and I'm just using the built-in benchmark. With the RTX 3050, it is struggling a bit. We're at 1080 medium, but DLSS is actually set at 50% resolution scale, and I'm using FSR frame gen. Unfortunately, with these 3000 series cards, we don't get NVIDIA's frame gen, and that would be really nice to have here. But by the end, we had an average of 72 FPS. And finally, we've got God of War Ragnarok 1080 medium with DLSS set to balanced. With this game, I would actually go to a low medium mix, but I've got that medium preset here. And most of the time, yeah, we're over 60, but in some cases I have seen it dip down to around 57. So if you don't want to take DLSS to performance, you'll have to go through and just kind of mix it up between medium and low to keep over that 60 mark. So overall, I think we're seeing some amazing performance out of this 1-liter mini PC. Now this configuration can be a bit different. You can go with the i7 if you want to. And if you'd like to see a 65-watt CPU tested in this, just let me know in the comments below. One thing here with the Gen 3s is you can find them refurbished, but the price will be much higher than a Gen 2, and you can see some very similar performance with the Gen 2. So what I'm going to do is leave links in the description for the Gen 2 and Gen 3, plus the GPU and power supply I opted to use for this build, just in case you want to put something like this together. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Again, if you want to see anything tested in this, like a 65-watt 12th gen CPU, let me know in the comments. Like always, thanks for watching.